Every time an object is created, we know that memory is allocated to it. So, memory is allocated only during object creation, not during the class creation. Member variables or data members, they are not initialized when we declare a class. So, the main purpose of this constructor is to do that initialization function. Member variables within a class cannot be initialized at the time of declaration. So, though you declare a class and you define its body, you give it member functions and you give it variables, the value of the variables cannot be given at the time you declare a class. So, that is a rule in C++. So, that is the reason why we go in for this concept of constructors. So, here is an example. Here we are having a class called CAL. We are having the class body which has two variables, one of type integer, name is num1, one of type float, name is num2. And here the values for num1 and num2 have been given in the class declaration, which is invalid. The class body ends here. Both these declarations and initialization of values to these declared variables is invalid. So, this kind of initialization is not allowed inside classes in C++. Then how are we going to give values to these variables? One way is we can get it from the user. The other way is this definition of the constructor. An initialization function that assigns initial values to the variables declared in a program is called the constructor function. This function is invoked as soon as the object is created. Every class has a data member and member function. When an object is created for a class, memory is allocated. Based on what the memory can be allocated, every object has a copy of the member function and a separate copy of the data member. So, if the data member is going to be an integer, 2 bytes or 4 bytes is going to be allocated. If a character is going to be a member, 1 byte is going to be allocated. So, based on the number and type of variables declared inside a class, when an object is created, the memory is going to be allocated. When the value is given for those data variables, it can be given using this constructor function. When is this constructor function called? See, when there is a function, you have to call it, you have to send a message to it asking it to execute, only then the function will get executed. So, constructor is nothing but a function which performs this task of assigning initial values. So, when is that function called? That function is called when the object is created. So, a constructor is an initialization function defined inside a class which is called when the object for that particular class is created. Every time an object is created for a class, the function is called. So, what is the definition of constructors? They are member functions of a class that have the same name as the class name. It is different from the other functions declared in a class because it is having the same name as the class name. They are invoked when an instance of the class is nothing but the object. Invoked when an object of that particular class is created. It is used for initialization of the data members or member variables. They do not return values. So, the two main points in which these constructors differ from other normal functions is their name. They have the same name as the class. The second thing is they cannot return any value. They do not have a return type. You do not say void or integer or float before the name of the constructor. You just give the constructor name and the parameters. So, this is an example of how to declare constructors. You have the class keyword called CAL, the body of the class is opened. You have the private access specifier, you are having two variables integer and float. You are having the public data which is nothing but a cal member function. Now, if you see the CAL is the same as the class name CAL, that is called the constructor function. You are having opening the body of the constructor and you are initializing it with values. Num1 you are saying 0 because it is of integer type, num2 you are giving 0.0 because it is of type float. So, this is the way constructors are declared inside C++, having the same name as the class name. If you see this particular name cal and this particular name are the same. So, it has the same name as the class name followed by opening and closing brackets, and there is no return type. There is nothing mentioned here void or integer or float because they do not have any return value, and you are having the initialization part being done here. Remember, the initialization of all the members is done here. Num1 is also given a value, num2 is also given a value, and the body of the constructor is closed like you close any other normal function. The class is closed with this semicolon. So, this is how you declare constructors in C++. Now, in case there are no constructors declared for a class, the compiler itself creates a default constructor. Default in the sense when nothing specifically is mentioned, the compiler will take up that particular option. The instantiation of an object of the class invokes a default constructor. Like the default constructor is not written by the programmer, it is not even visible to the programmer. The compiler itself creates a default constructor and initializes all the member variables and data members that are declared inside that class for that particular object to 0 values. So, this default constructor is called by the compiler when the programmer fails to create a constructor for the class, and it is called like any other normal constructor. Whenever an object is created for a class, the default constructor is called by the compiler. In certain cases, class constructors are not invoked to initialize a newly defined class object.